Hello, I'm Soycat, and huge news for the end of the Russia-Ukraine war because Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, has for the first time conceded that he's likely to lose some territory. This came up because he said that NATO membership would have to apply to the entirety of Ukraine with its internationally recognized borders. This is the standard position, and it makes sense. Ukraine is this country right here, and it was until 2022, or 2014 for Crimea, and this is the Ukraine that the world should still continue to see. But if NATO membership was going to be offered to the whole country, he concedes that he'd have to get the Russian-controlled territory back in a diplomatic way. In other words, he'd have to ask Russia nicely, and that's a small way of saying, yeah, if we had NATO membership, we might be able to at least temporarily give up on that territory. Indeed, you can't have a ceasefire without Russia getting re-geared up for a war, because ceasefires are simply too dangerous without it, and so that is where the current position is at, and this changes things hugely. And so when will the war end? If you ask President-elect Trump, he says he'll end it within 24 hours, but what does that exactly mean? Well, I want to dive into what both Trump and his envoy that he's specifically tasked with the job actually say about that, and it's going to be interesting to look at what this looks like for Ukraine in the end, and the spoiler alert is not good. So Ukraine is going to be smaller, at least in control terms. Google Maps is going to get another dashed line going across Ukraine here, but what exactly will that line look like? Well, let's dive into it today. So first things first, Ukraine has been at war for a couple of years because Russia invaded it, and this is a bad thing, and no one likes that, I think it should go without saying, and Russia's economy has been going through, honestly, a bad time, surprisingly not bad given just how sanctioned they are, but it has started to flag. It's really hit its worst times in multiple different ways. There was a slight bounce in certain stock markets and government bond markets because of the election of Donald Trump, but as you can see, it's kind of hitting a low point in terms of the ruble, but not that low in the grand scheme of things. So Russia can keep going at this for a while, whereas Ukraine is starting to reach a point where this is just a lot of money and men and, again, resources for the country, and so as a Western person, you should say, well, it's worth sending the extra money and the whatever you can to Ukraine to help then continue to do the fight until Russia's economy collapses. However, if you instead are trying to take the view of we want to just end the war as soon as possible and let's ignore all the other details, well then that is kind of the opinion that Keith Kellogg kind of comes to. So Keith Kellogg is he's 80, he's a retired lieutenant general, and he was the chief of staff and also he served under he's national security advisor to Mike Pence, the vice president. He's a veteran himself, and he's someone who Trump really likes apparently, but he basically has a simple view of the conflict, which is, yeah, this is the plan he has put out publicly earlier this year. The US should continue to arm Ukraine. I know this is something a lot of Trump people are like full isolationists, but they should continue to arm Ukraine on contingency of Ukraine participating in peace talks with Russia. Right now, Ukraine is very skeptical of doing basically that because the idea is simple. I mean, one is the fact that if you propose a ceasefire without any mechanism to prevent Russia from attacking again, the ceasefire is too dangerous, and the second is the fact that a ceasefire currently ends on Russia's terms. So to look at what the country would look like if you were to just agree on a ceasefire right now and whoever controls what gets to keep it, as you can see, Russia controls about 20% of Ukraine. They formally annexed these 4 territories just after the war began, but they don't control all of them right now, and also as you can see right here, right now at time of, at the 28th of, as of the 28th of November 2024, as of that date right there, you can see that technically Ukraine has a little bit of Russia right here in the Kursk region. It's actually kind of wild when you look into it, like, yeah, this entire village of Sudza, I couldn't resist at least doing a little bit of a look into this town, right? But you can actually, if you want to, you can look around it and you can see like, oh yeah, there are some Russian people who live here who temporarily live under Ukrainian control, right? Isn't that wild? Also, isn't it wild, like, even though this is Russia, to me, maybe this is just me, this like reminds me of like, like generic random northeast town in America. Maybe just me. Maybe it's interesting to me, right? Like looking around this town, it is a real place that is currently under Ukrainian control, and a logical ceasefire probably ends without them getting to keep the bits of Russia they have. While Russia's going to claim, oh yeah, a ceasefire should end with us keeping our territory, which we currently control. Which we all of these regions are part of our country now. They're in our constitution and everything, and then that's kind of where part of the disagreement ends up. The other disagreement is obviously this could allow if you stop the war machine in Russia, they can recover their economy and they can build up for a second attack. And so that's why a ceasefire and the end of a war right now is a bad thing for Ukraine. It's probably, Russia secretly said, Russia hasn't technically said that they're down with not having all of Ukraine. Indeed, not only has Russia's Vladimir Putin has given absolutely no indication that he's abandoned his desire to subjugate Ukraine entirely. So from Russia's perspective, they're like, well, I would accept a ceasefire ceasefire, but really, you know, I feel like you guys still didn't learn your lesson that you should be going against us, and that when we say not to do something, that we really mean it. And so that's kind of the hard bit to broker there. But yeah, basically the other points of this is that in order to convince Ukraine to join peace talks, NATO leaders should opt to hold off on Ukraine's NATO membership. This is a point which kind of makes sense. The war was started over NATO membership, and so using NATO membership as a way to end it is a dangerous plan, but that's basically why Volodymyr Zelenskyy is asking for that. So hold off on NATO membership and have Russia some form of sanctions relief if it signs a peace agreement. Say, we will give you relief from the giant pressure your economy's under if you actually will sign a lasting peace. And then also there's going to be some levies charged on Russia to use for the reconstruction of Ukraine. In other words, saying you caused damage in Ukraine and so you export a lot of gas. We'll start buying that gas again, but some of that money is going to have to go to Ukraine. And it's a simple enough idea, right? Or rather, so we're going to charge you extra money to go to Ukraine. It's the point about tariffs and how prices go again. But will the plan actually work? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different opinions on that. And what does Trump think? I think this is hilarious personally, but I want to share this with you. Trump says he has a very exciting plan on how to stop Ukraine and Russia, and he can't give us those plans because if he gives us those plans, he's not going to be able to use them. They'll be unsuccessful. Part of it is surprise. And honestly, I mean, part of this is campaigning, right? You've got to concede that, like, he literally says he vows to end the war in 24 hours. Part of that is campaigning, that you just say, I had the smartest plans, but I can't tell you them. But enough part of that is actually true. The actual strategy for a negotiation is you can't yell what your grey lines are, your red lines are. You can't yell your plans out loud. And so maybe Trump does have a genius move, or maybe he's going to put it all down to this Kellogg fella over here. But in either case, that is the long story short of it, is that Ukraine and Russia are at war, and Ukraine right now probably wants the fighting to end, but what it wants much more is not to concede that it has to lose territory, either the current territory or even any more. And so there needs to be, if you want to find any space between those two positions, some form of international cooperation. That could come in the ideal form for Ukraine, the West German model, as they call it. The West German model, where membership is offered to a divided country, but they only promise to defend part of it. You'd basically create a West Ukraine and an East Ukraine. West Ukraine would be fully capitalist and integrate better with NATO and presumably also the European Union. It would get a lot of its dreams in terms of its westward ambitions, whereas Eastern Ukraine would be basically a part of Russia. In the same way that East and West Germany have the same thing. This is a very large country, and losing 20% of it is no laughing matter. But that is the concession that has to be made. That is the on a moral level, you can make an entire point that no, actually, I don't think Ukraine should have to give up any territory whatsoever. But on a trying to find a ceasefire level, you can actually argue that even though the most moral thing would be if everyone says, let's go back to the start of the war, that isn't a position that you're going to reach on either side right now. And so, the long story short of this is this man right here and this man right here have to come together and work out what it is that they can do to actually stop this, except neither one of them even really fully trust the other, so you need international something to come in. In the case of Trump's opinion, that basically comes down, if we can take from what he has said publicly, it's likely to come down from something to do with having military aid in the future be contingent on Ukraine participating in peace talks, basically saying, yeah, we have given you money so far, but that money will run out unless you commit to finding an end date for this war. We're not just writing blank checks forever, in other words. And so that is the thing that might push, the Ukraine to get to an endpoint, whereas Russia's pushed, which is something Russia is very happy with. He says there's a very intelligent US president-elect that will find a solution. And so basically right now there is just this point of Russia and Ukraine are trying to find a point where they're both happy. And ultimately, I think that even though, I'm going to make a hot take here, on the internet what you're meant to say is like, oh yeah, I think that actually Ukraine we should give Ukraine some bits of, they should get all of their territory back, including Crimea. And I think that that is the correct viewpoint to have in terms of if there was some form of international court that could enforce its rulings, that is the only fair thing for that international court to say, right? However, in a world where you're not willing to have, where you don't have that international court that actually can enforce things on Russia, and where you're not willing to have the US step up and literally invade Crimea on the ground, have a nuclear on nuclear conflict, in a world where we're having a proxy conflict in the way that we are, the only, you're only allowed to step in certain ways. The only fair, the right thing to do is the thing that stops the fewest people dying. Are the people in these regions more likely to die now that they are part of Russia than Ukraine? You could maybe make that argument. But people right now are dying every single day in large volumes, trying to fight back and forth again and again for the same stretches of land that a year ago or 6 months ago could have been agreed on as to where they will. And so ultimately, even the fact that both sides have incompatible positions is something you do need to resolve. And I hate that that is true, and I don't like that that is true, but ultimately the most moral thing to do is the thing that avoids having to conscript even more men into the war, even more Ukrainian, again, I think the right thing to do is the thing that builds up the actual country of Ukraine to be able to be better prepared to avoid this in the future, and ideally, I think would also be a Western guarantee that, yeah, okay, there are some, in exchange for these great grand concessions that maybe you want Russia, we are actively going to put our own feet in there. I don't think NATO membership is the right call. I think NATO membership is basically just saying, it's almost like a pity guarantee to Ukraine. There's not a great deal that Ukraine brings to the alliance, but there is a great deal of liability they bring to the alliance. I don't think that's the correct solution on that one, but how exactly it goes is going to be a messy one. And the interesting thing is, will Ukraine ever officially concede they've lost those territories? Crimea was lost in 2014, and again, the Western world says that it is Ukrainian, but makes no effort to go after it. Will the exact same thing happen on the east of Ukraine? Even though Russia's going to say this is just Russian territory, will Ukraine ever concede that itself? Will the international world concede it? I think the answer is no. Russia invaded parts of Georgia and made them into self-proclaimed republics, and to this day, they are still grey lines on Google Maps, even though, again, they're actually moving the borders. It's a whole, Russia and its neighbors. Not a great situation in terms of lots of things, but yeah, that is the interesting situation, and I think that this is going to be something a lot of Europe are watching, because especially the Polands and the Baltic countries of the world, and maybe even Finland and Sweden too, are watching this and saying, oh, so they just get to keep some of the spoils of war? A lot of people are going to be very ideologically driven to say, no, this is not acceptable. Any amount of money is worth it to avoid this happening, but ultimately without actually being able to spend that money or those military resources themselves, it's going to be a very tragic thing, and that's something that sucks. I would like a world where we had magic blah, 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 but ultimately countries invade each other and lots of people have died, and the end result is like, yeah, some slightly Russian regions of Ukraine are going to probably be moved over to Russia, and hopefully in the future one day they magically move back, but I don't know that that's the end conclusion. Russia, by the way, Ukraine will still be, I think it's still likely to be the biggest country in Europe, if not the second biggest, and it will be, at least in the central and western half, likely eventually better off from this war. The whole of the Western world rallied around Ukraine in a way that is probably good for them in the long run. It's just a shame about all the territories that Russia keeps stealing. And again, if you border Russia right now, this video is actually sponsored by a private military corporation. I don't know what the joke should be here. Get yourself some home security. If you live on if you live on a border with Russia, make sure you get some Russian flags ready. Just be prepared for that, because you never know when it's going to happen. I'm just saying. I'd be watching out if I was living right here. If I lived in this village right here, I would keep a set of Russian license plates ready. I'd get a Russian passport ready to go, and I would just... Or honestly, even better, right? If you're living on the Russian side of the border, you don't know what's going to happen there either. Just if you live too close to a border, just, get the second flag ready just in case, because that's a thing that can happen, as we've proven for the 50th time in the last 100 years. Anyway, with that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you enjoy these videos where I try to actually dive into it rather than just saying, nuh-uh, this is the right thing and that's what's more important than anything else, then please consider becoming a Patreon member, link down below. You can get access to all sorts of fun things, but mostly you buy... I don't use it to improve the quality of these videos. It's just me talking on a green screen here. I use it to buy lobster rolls, and if you want to support that or buy me a drink, you can do precisely that. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and by the way, before I go, sorry, this is way more important than becoming a Patreon member. Can you tell me, looking at these blobs right here, right, especially in Ukraine, these circles aren't circles, right? I feel like I'm seeing that, but I feel like I might be, I feel like I must have gone crazy or, drank too much of something. Have I been poisoned? The circle around Donetsk is not a circle, right? Can we agree on that? No matter how far I zoom in, it doesn't look like it's a circle. But is that Google Maps that's broken, or is that my eyes? Okay, thank you for watching. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye. I do care about that last bit, though. Let me know.